John and I, Scotty, participated in an event in Edmonton that honored the 84-85 Oilers as the greatest team in NHL history, as voted by fans league-wide. The arena was packed. It was a gala affair, but there was an undercurrent of belief that perhaps this wasn't the Oilers team that should have been picked. For those playing at home, this was the second Stanley Cup team. The first, a year earlier, actually had a better record. And then there was the mention of the 76-77 Canadians that lost only 8 of 80 games and probably would have received your vote, I'm guessing. Was that the best team you ever coached or saw? And if so, what set it apart?
It was real close. And you're right, Dave, the record stands for itself. And that team lost 8 games and tied 12 and won 60. And the point record was taken away last year by Boston, which was amazing too. And
there should be an asterisk there, Scotty. They played 2 extra games, though.
Well, yeah, and I mean we didn't have the overtime, but,
and no
but
overtime,
teams records get shattered. But I had a hard time when I look at the team we had. I counted the Hall of Fame players on the team. And, depending on that team, I'm not sure. Like, I know we always had the goalie, Ken Dryden.
I got them all here if you need them.
Pardon?
I got them all here if you need them, but I don't think you need them.
Well, Detroit.
You'll get all the names.
Detroit and Montreal were the 2 teams. To me, a player reaches the Hall of Fame. It's not gospel, maybe, but it's important because the committee that they'll make the decisions, and they're usually all hockey people from all different kinds of people. They're not just fans. They're not that there's anything wrong with fans making decisions, but that team in Montreal and the team in Detroit, the last team I had, I mean, we had 9 Hall of Fame players on each team, and I don't think Detroit had. I know we didn't have the record. Maybe the competition was tougher. So I mean, it's so hard to judge comparison teams because I know that when we were in Montreal in the 70s, there wasn't as much parity as we have later on. And the Oilers were a special team because they could score so easily, and they had, they must have had half a dozen Hall of Fame players. But I always deferred to the Canadian team because of the defense corps. And I even watch today the games and the teams, and I go back to our time. Nobody ever matched a defense corps. Like, the only team that ever had a better defense corps than the Canadians, to me, was the 1976 Canada Cup, because you could add Bobby Orr, you could add Dennis Potvin to the 3 that we had. I mean, and to me, if you have a defense, Dave, and it's the same as the game today. It's so hard. I mean, the defensemen, they stand out, and I think that's the one area where it's been tough for the team. It seems that when teams are drafting way down in the standing, the best example would be the Oilers. They had all those first-round picks, and none of the defensemen. They didn't pick any defensemen, but none of the other teams that took defensemen were really stood out. So that's why I compare the Canadians to nobody, because I saw Montreal play in the 50s. They had Doug Harvey and Tommy Johnson, both in the Hall of Fame. They were great players. I saw the Red Wings in the 50s with fellas like Red Kelly. I'm not sure about Marcel Pronovo. You'd have to say, is he in the Hall of Fame? But I do know Bob Goldham was a great defensive defenseman. He's not in the Hall of Fame. And I can honestly say I work with Lynn Patrick, and every time a player would go into the Hall of Fame, he always would say to me, not as good as Bob Goldham to a team. I mean, he was a special type of defenseman. We know that. I mean, hockey people know. I mean, the old timers know how good he was. But I say defense takes over for me. Defense and goaltending, and I couldn't find a better goaltender than Dryden in the NHL records. 6 or 6. And everybody will say yes, but he had a great team. That doesn't count for me because goaltenders in every game have to face power plays, have to face teams that can have a little bit of a stretch, and he had a great record.
Well, Robinson, Lapointe, and Savard, and you hit it for me. I remember that team for showcasing the importance of greatness on defense. And then there's the great trivia answer: who was number 4? And the answer was Bill Nyrop, which used to, you could win a beer anytime. Give me the 4th defenseman after those big 3. But to bring it to the present day, I mean, we watched Vegas win the Stanley Cup last season. Didn't take them long. They came close in year 1, and I think they proved the value of a solid defense. Pietrangelo and Theodore and 4 others were so solid last season. Didn't stand out necessarily, other than the fact that they had 6 guys that protected a goalie named Aiden Hill and went all the way to the Stanley Cup. And so probably it never changes. And I've always said, if you're building a team, and you probably agree with this, start with the defense and go from there.
You're talking to a coach who had Nick Lidstrom. I mean, Nick Lidstrom and Brian Rafalski and Slava Fetisov, and
Larry,
it was like you won the lottery, Scotty.
Yeah, am I right?
Veteran defenseman. I think, if I could bring it up right now, is one of the top contenders in the NHL to me has maybe the most solid 6-man defense core, different types of guys, Carolina Hurricanes. Okay. People look at Carolina and they say, who's the goalie? We're not sure of him. We don't know a lot of their players. They're in a smaller market, but their defense core and the way they play, I mean, they're insulated with a lot of a good coach that makes the players work hard. But Pesce and Slavin and these players are Brady Shea. They're a little bit above the average, and they've got about 4 or 5 of them. So I look at these. There's teams in the league that they're pretty good. I mean, we don't have to look at the Oilers. I mean, they lose a defenseman now. The one they got from Nashville, Ekman.
Ekman, yeah.
And now people are saying, well, wait till he comes back, and probably right. But I look at the league, and I look at teams, and Dave's right. The Vegas team had different types of defensemen. You want a puck carrier, you want a solid defenseman, you want size. And I look at Colorado, and with Taves, and I remember this because I was with Chicago, and they had the 3rd pick, and I still just don't like what happened. Although I think the player's starting to develop with Montreal. But Bowen Byram, I remember telling the people, I said, if you don't take Byram on number 3, the Avalanche are going to take him. You'll have a decade of Byram and also Makar, who had just been in there about 3 years. Bowen Byram's a pretty underrated player. When they won the Stanley Cup and they won the 6th game in Tampa, no player on both teams played more ice time in a 1-game off that they won the cup in that game. I remember watching him, and I think if he had a terrible injury his first year. He got in a fight, which probably he shouldn't have. Got beat pretty bad in a fight against a guy that fights well. But defense can win so many games now, and I think that's like Dave said, but they're so hard to get. And teams make mistakes, and I think they don't take defensemen early because there's forwards that look pretty good too.
Aren't they afraid that defensemen take longer to mature, and you need instant gratification from a player if you draft them high?
Yes, and Dave, John, the puck carrying defenseman now, the type that you can get to move the pockets. Now that people figure it might be swinging back to size, that big defenseman in front of the net, they can't push you around, or they can't push you out of the way, but they can, if they're big, the pucks are gonna, the shot blocking is maybe one of the biggest things that have changed the game. I watched the game the other night. Rangers played at Buffalo, and Buffalo's a pretty high scoring team, third in the overall scoring last year. And boy, Rangers came in, and I don't know if it was the style or what, but they blocked 27 shots in a game, which was really, I mean, Buffalo had shots, but they never got through to the goalie.
Yeah. We're with Scotty Bowman. And Dave Hodge is here. I'm John Shannon. This is the McCowan Podcast. Back after this.